Mr. Olson, I have to share with you, I had 2 years in which we participated in activities at the Bipartisan Policy Center and the Governor's Council, and I found the approach to be enlightening, and I found it to be encouraging when we could come together and find ways in which, on a bipartisan basis, we could impact policy change at the national level. In listening to the testimony here among all of you, it's been enlightening to me today. I just want to come up with an analysis to begin with in terms of where I want to go with this, and then I'd like your thoughts on this. The designation of a bank as systemically risky has a wider ripple effect across the economy as a whole. And I know that we're talking right now simply about the safety of the bank and about whether or not we could have a catastrophe on our hands if the banks were to fail. But last week when we talked to the regulators, they were basically telling us that we didn't have to worry and that they knew what they were doing when it came to regulating the banking industry. I think they were well-intentioned. I think they really do believe that they have things under control. But what I want to know is that when we talk about their decisions and the impact they have, not just in the banks, but on the economy as a whole, and how it affects the borrowers and access to credit, to me, their answers were troubling, because it seemed as though we were looking at this in a vacuum. I think the regulatory decisions they make don't just occur in that vacuum, and that they have a real effect on real people that need access to capital and credit. For example, when a bank is forced to hire more compliance officers or retain more capital, it makes fewer loans, and I think that's what Mr. Smithy is suggesting. This means that there's less money available for small business owners to start and expand businesses. If we take a look at what's happening to our economy since the beginning of a recovery and what appears to be not a robust recovery, I wonder whether or not a lot of that has to do with literally a regulatory hand on the top of the ball, which is sitting in the water, holding it down from where it would otherwise be. So with that, I'm just curious, because Mr. Smithy, you've talked about the impact that it's had on your bank, but from 2009 to 2013, your risk management expenses, I believe under your testimony, you indicated that it had doubled. Now you've indicated that your costs are somewhere around $200 million. But what did it do to your ability to make loans? And I think there's an impact there. Would you care to share a little bit about what the impact has been on your bank's ability to make loans?
Sure. I would add one other stat that is very interesting, is we now have more people in our organization devoted to compliance-related matters than we do for commercial lending.
And in fact, I think across the financial institution world, right now we're talking about, since 2009, I think the number I heard was 300,000 more people employed in financial services, and yet it's in compliance is where they're at, rather than in the production side of things.
And again, Senator, I would stipulate that we've learned a lot through the process. We are better at understanding the risks we take. It's better controlled. We have better concentration risk management practices in place. There has been modeling enhancements that have come out of the crisis and the stress testing framework that I would submit helps us make better decisions. But at the end of the day, it's the fact that we have to keep capital and liquidity in surplus to guard against risks that we think are remote, and that is capital and liquidity that can't be used to make those loans you're suggesting.
I think there seems to be a sense that $50 billion was arbitrary, and that it's a matter of trying to find the right number. But also, we've heard testimony today that it should be based upon the activity that's being involved, and that would be perhaps a better model. But Mr. Olson, I'm curious, under the proposal that you've looked at, how do we know that if we allow more of an opportunity for the regulator to make those decisions, that we don't end up with a regulatory process which is even more challenging with regard to trying to figure out what the regulator is going to want this year versus next year versus the following year, and just how much tether should we have on a regulator to make those demands upon the banking industry or the individual banks that they're looking at?
Yeah, very important fundamental question, Senator. And having been on both sides, having been a banker and having been a bank regulator, being a banker among other places in Fergus Falls, Minnesota, and being a bank regulator with the Fed, the one thing that becomes very clear when you become a regulator is that Congress has given a very specific mandate to the regulators. Your responsibility is the financial institution's safety and soundness and compliance with laws and regulations. That's the rule. So the balance between what is the appropriate regulatory regime and legal regime is the responsibility of the policymakers, which is the Congress. That to me is why why it's important to have hearings like this, especially in light of a major piece of legislation, much of which is supported by the bipartisan policy group in terms of its overall effect. But looking at that balance is really key.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.